we are officially live streaming this part of the conversation because, again, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, what we know to be true is the business case for diversity says that organizations that are more diverse or more creative, they become more profitable over time if those individuals that are brought into the organization are included, if they feel included. So it's not just about bringing them in, it's about also creating a learning culture of inclusion. Now, there's tons of research that talks about this. And what I'd like to also highlight, the benefits of diversity, companies, there was a whole list here. We were just talking about, better performance. We were talking about the, more trust, more effective, better business processes. I could go on and on and on. So lots of benefits from diversity, but there's also challenges when that diversity happens and the individuals don't feel included. Individuals, when they're included, according to Harvard, every university, numerous universities have done this work. But when individuals are not included, they experience exclusion like physical pain. And the negative impacts are sociological, they don't connect as well. The physiological, raised heart rates and all the things that are not good for our body, higher blood pressure, negative energy, higher stress levels, anxiety, all the things. Your intellect is even lowered when you're excluded. And think about people who don't just experience one moment of exclusion, but a lifetime, continual exclusion that wears on the body. And so when we think about inclusion and exclusion, I just thought it was important for business leaders to understand that it's a process. You're not going to immediately bring someone diverse onto your team and expect immediate increased profitability. There's a process, there's a learning. So when we go back, we're going to talk to some individuals who was just, clarifying how important it is that we listen to each other, that we create that learning space. And Bree, introduce yourself again and tell us your thoughts about the importance of creating a learning culture of inclusion.
Yes, my name is Bree Gastaldi. I'm the founder of The Inclusive Educator, and I mostly focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to individuals who are differently abled, specifically in school districts. But I'm definitely happy to speak on this as it relates to my business. And I think that when we talk about inclusion, I really liked the way that you said it works if, right? Because if really inclusion is one thing, but belonging is another thing, right? Absolutely. So inclusion can be kind of that surface level, oh, we have a lot of people who represent a wide range of cultural and ethnic and linguistic backgrounds, and maybe are differently abled in their own individual ways too. But how do we move beyond the representation and move into the feeling and the culture of belonging, right? And capitalizing on people's strengths and lifting those strengths up. How do we incorporate those strengths into everything that we do, whether it's a classroom, which is what I focus on specifically, but how can we incorporate that into our business culture or our company's culture too? So it takes, there's another step, right? Because you said the if, and that the if is if we can all get there, right? And that if for me is really that sense of belonging. Do I feel like I'm valued in this situation? It's not just a matter of I'm here, I'm showing up. It's my thoughts are valued, my my individuality is valued. So that's kind of how it shows up for me.
I love it. I love it. And what I also like to emphasize on this journey, the importance of understanding how the brain works. So when I said earlier that when you're excluded, it's clearly not a good thing, right? Your brain processes exclusion like physical pain. And you just shared a little bit about the source of that pain. Can we talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So when we are working or operating from a place of fear, we're really accessing a part of our brain that's located in the back of our head, close to the brain stem. And this is a very primitive part of the brain. It's where that fight, flight, or freeze instinct comes from. So, you know, back a million years ago when we were living out in nature, right? And we were maybe in a situation where we were scared, we'd want to run out of that situation. That same behavior is still present today, but just in a little bit more of a sneaky way, maybe. So if we're around people who look different than us, talk different than us, act different from us, we might still be operating from that primitive part of our brain. And we want to leave that situation because it makes us uncomfortable, makes us a little scared. But research shows that the way to recondition our brain is through exposure. So the more exposure we have to people or situations that are different from us or make us uncomfortable, the more we're shifting from that primitive part of our brain to our more evolved part of our brain, like the prefrontal cortex. But it takes that exposure. It takes being able to sit with discomfort and move from that primitive part of our brain to the prefrontal cortex.
I love it. I love that. And I think, you know, what's critical is I'm looking at Wendy. I'm going to bring her into this conversation as well. Can I bring you in, Wendy? Is that, so you're muted. I'm going to bring you in. And it looks like Miss Diana Kincaid. Are you okay, Bing? I got a yes. Yeah. So ladies, based on the conversations we've been having today, what are your thoughts? What comes to mind? You're smiling, Wendy. What are you liking about this? What would you like to emphasize?
I love every part of this, especially how Bree was talking about the where we're operating out of fear. I knew this because it's part of something that I have been experiencing it throughout my life. Didn't know exactly the medical or the neuroscience behind it, but I definitely can resonate with the thought of people operating out of fear, and how also inclusion, excuse me, feels like physical pain. I've been in situations where I was in a really high level position and still felt that real exclusion, and really felt like physical pain. I mean, that's how I responded to it. And so it really does resonate. And it's not enough to hire people of color in organizations that are predominantly white. There's so much more that goes into it, because what happens is you get hired and then you're on an island by yourself, and you see people, but it's like you're over here saying, hey, what about me? And so there's a lot of groundwork that companies, organizations, that corporate needs to listen, like Victor has said, really listen and pay attention to when you hire in people of color and ask them, you know, once they get in a position, what are some of your needs? How can I support you? And that benefit of the doubt, you know, that's one of those things that's going to be a huge culture shift, is that benefit of the doubt that people of color, we'd love to have some of that when we're in these jobs, and not, you know, being let go because the personalities didn't totally jive or whatever it is. But it's operating out of that fear, you know, that not being exposed enough to what does good relationships look like. you know.
I love it. Diana, you were nodding your head earlier. What of all the topics you've heard would you like to emphasize? And then Victor, I'm going to come back to you. We're going to talk about the importance of listening to each other and taking the time.
Okay.
Diana?
Well, there are a couple of things here. I love the discussion about the brain. I have been recovering from a concussion for the last year. So it's a
Wow.
little different, right? But I relate very strongly to a lot of what you're saying. And there's a lot of exclusion that occurs when your brain just isn't working quite like you want it to. There's a lot of fear that creates, right? So that's from my own personal experience, but in a broader way, what I see is we're working at Magnuson Park, and I'm with a committee, and we're trying to figure out a way to make it inclusive and how to build a feeling of safety so people can interact and feel safe. And trying to sort that out, and even the physical structure of the park itself has made it kind of exclusive. And so how to change that dynamic, how to welcome in everyone to work together is my big question. And we haven't been successful with that. And I really want us to be successful with that. It's just because it is painful. It's painful to see. It's painful to watch.
Wow. I love that. I love your honesty. I appreciate it. I also appreciate the fact that you are saying what you want, what you need, and the fact that you're not there. What I also love about this conversation is that we're all on a journey, right? We're all on a journey together. I'm trying to bring in Victor again. I'm working let's see.
I also want to say I
Yes.
appreciate being invited.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Victor, one of the things that you shared earlier is you were talking about the importance of us listening to each other, taking the time to listen, be real specific and talk to a business owner around why it's important for them to think about creating a space to listen to others with different opinions to help their business. Why it's important for not just society, but why it's important for their business, because business owners are short on time. Everything matters. So talk to a business owner. I know you're rolling score. Tell us again why this concept of inclusion is important to entrepreneurs.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Traci. Basically, what I would like to say to a business owner who wants to improve their business, to have more diversity and inclusion within their either their clients or business partners. I think that the best way to do it is when you interview an individual and ask him or invite him to your business, or ask him, or you want to be a mentor or to be, let's say, a counselor to somebody to grow their business, ask them what is what they need, what is what they want. And once they express their thoughts or their ideas, then thank them for that. You know, there is one thing that sometimes we miss to say thank you for something that we both benefit. Either, you know, Diana was mentioning some things that I think is very important. When somebody tries to express a thought, and you really want to get their attention, and you really want to know that you are listening to them, say something like, do I hear you say, and and repeat what you think that the person told you. because that's very important. Also
I love that.
understanding different cultures, even within our society here in the United States. I greatly recommend for anybody who is in business or trying to learn something about different cultures. It's a book that I read years ago called, and I'm going to show it to you. It's called Managing Cultural Differences. This book was written years ago, but managing different cultures will help you to understand how different people behave and how they express themselves. I read this book because I was doing business throughout Africa, Europe, the United States, Canada, Latin America, and
Right.
really even within the United States, people in the South
Yes.
behave differently than people in the North and the East on the West Coast.
Right.
And this is
Right.
something that we all understand, but what happens is even within our own state of Washington, okay, we have multiple cultures, especially in the Seattle area, that we need to comprehend and understand how people are doing, what is happening, and how we behave the way we do is because our experiences, and this is very simple. If you say, here are the experiences that I have, and the experiences create a certain behavior in myself, okay, the behaviors are going to result in certain actions that I'm going to take. And by those actions that I'm taking, there are going to be certain results. So if I have a company and I want to change the results of my company, like you, Traci, are mentioning, how do I change the results in my company? Is going back and learning new experiences to create new behaviors that will result in different actions. And this will give me the definite results that I'm looking for. So if, you know,
100%.
it's like a pyramid. Here,
Absolutely.
if you want different results, you have to go ahead and go back to those experiences. But if it is like Bria was mentioning, you know, sometimes when we are caught up in a situation that is very uncomfortable to us, we react. We have that reaction, and that's natural. That's human behavior. We react, but we don't act probably with a better, in a more logical way, I would say, with a
Well,
person that is really thinking.
yes, and I think it's also about being intentional, right? This idea of diversity and inclusion, we've been talking about it for decades. We have not been intentional about creating different outcomes. So when you talk about the importance of getting different results, that's you bringing different actions. It's like, I love it. Sounds simple, people, but that really is the fact. And there's complexity in it, but it's relatively simple. So that the topic we were focused on was business leaders. How do you get more results as it relates to diversity and inclusion? We talked about
I would
focusing
say
on inclusion and this learning culture of inclusion. That's what you're talking about, Victor. You're creating a culture.
But
Yes.
what I'm saying is, just because
Yes.
I brought in some people who are, let's say, not 100% white, if I bring a Black individual into my organization, like Wendy was mentioning before, you feel isolated because nobody's paying attention to what you bring. If a person, if I were Wendy and somebody hires me into an organization that is 100% white and I'm the only Black individual, I would say, what is the purpose of you bringing me into your organization? Ask the question and you will get an answer. And I would go further and say, why are you hiring me? Are you hiring me because of my color? Or are you hiring me because of I am an individual that you really sincerely want to learn how I can benefit your company? But sometimes we don't ask. And I think sincerity is very much in the game when we're talking about inclusion and diversity. Even within any organization, we want to say, oh, we want to be diverse and we want to have inclusion. At the beginning, it was only diversion, right? Let us hire different people. And then we said that, yeah, we are doing this, but we are not including them into the decisions that we make. And that's what I think it's so important to listen to that other part of the individual, because that's a benefit to the company, but not listening and really paying attention to what they have to think. We might be hearing, but we are not listening. And there is a big difference between those two, and we all know about that. So just hearing somebody else, yeah, I hear my wife, everybody say, but I don't really listen to her, right? I mean, I really have
Wait a minute, you're gonna get in trouble for that one, Victor. You're gonna get in trouble for that one. But everyone's smiling. And when I think about diversity, it's clearly not a black or white conversation, right? It's about inclusion for all, belonging for all. So these same principles apply to everyone and everything as relates to these topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I saw every eye or every head nod. We have a few minutes left, and we were talking about this concept of listening. But let's also just end with any, Duncan just came on. Duncan, I'm gonna bring you on as well. I'm gonna add you as a spotlight. There you go. So I just want to bring a few of these faces on. Duncan, what have you heard specifically? Your hand is raised. That means you got something to say. What do you got to say? What do you contribute on this topic of inclusion?
I do. Thank you, Traci. I want to apologize for not being more active on this. I've been preparing lunch for my family.
That's awesome.
I saw this event just before before 12 o'clock, so I signed up, but I had to attend to my duty.
I love that.
But I've been following closely. I have some reactions to what's been said. I appreciate everything that's been said. I think what we've talked a lot about is the value of inclusion, and points were made earlier. I think that it's not just a business case. There is certainly a business case to be made for creating an environment of inclusion and diversity, and we know that, and that's been expressed well here. And I think it's important to say that. So for different audiences, you have different messages about why you promote inclusion and diversity. I think that is an important one, but it's not, obviously not the only argument to be made. It's the human thing to do, the right thing to do. There's a whole range of humanitarian reasons why we do that, about creating a better society. But it so happens that it also creates more effective organizations as you're doing that. So that's just one reaction I had there. Another point, I think Victor expressed this quite well. I certainly related to what he said. In some regards, we've all been minorities in certain situations in our lives, okay? I've been in a situation in work and other environments surrounded by women, for example, surrounded by people of color, for example, where I felt, I think, what more traditional minorities in our country feel. At the same time, I'm also aware I've never been, I've lived over about 1/5 of my life in other cultures. And so I've experienced being a minority there. But I also am aware I've never been a minority who is subject to systematic discrimination, as some people of color have been in this country, obviously. Arguably, all people of color have to some degree. And so that's an experience I've never had. So I can relate to some of the experience of being a minority, including the psychological discomfort, maybe even translating into physical discomfort that people have mentioned. I thought that was a really interesting point about how it plays out in the body. That I think I can relate to. But so my point to draw from that, and this was also expressed by others, is we really have to see people as individuals, not as the color that they are, the gender that they are, whatever other things differentiate them from others. We have to look beyond that. And that point was really well made. And I have often felt, and especially in recent years, in discussing issues like this in institutional settings, that I was stereotyped as a white male.
Yes.
Somewhat well-educated, all the different characteristics of the white male dominant stereotype. And I felt somewhat offended and uncomfortable because of stereotyping. And people were not looking into what I might feel. They weren't interested into what I might feel. They weren't interested in my life experience. And I'm sure the minority people feel that way all the time. So somehow we have to find ways to transcend that and find the individual in each of us, in each of our colleagues and partners and friends. And so we don't have enough time, but I really would be interested in a conversation that goes into how we do that. How, if we were able to have a follow-on to this, how we go about creating that environment of inclusion. What are the tools that are used in various ways? And I would be very interested in discussing that next time. Thank you.
So Duncan, first of all, thank you for bringing your voice forward. We are at time. However, I am going to continue this conversation if you're open to continue it with me, because we do have solutions.
I would be interested in a follow-up conversation to this one in which we're able to get into more about how we actually go about creating and ensuring and sustaining a environment of inclusion within our organizations or the organizations we work with, in the case of those who are entrepreneurs or whatever. So that would be my interest in going forward. I can share with you some things that I found to be really illuminating for me and my experience in doing that. One type is to have people, generally we had outside facilitators leading us, and having people in a large meeting, and often around, well, we were grouped in small tables in a very large meeting room, and the facilitators would ask questions to try to bring out the differences in our backgrounds and experiences. And the questions were really insightful and surprising and kind of provocative in some ways. So some of those questions were like, how many of you grew up going to church? Or some sort of religious regular meeting, gathering. How many of you ever went hungry within your family? How many of you didn't have enough food to eat? How many of you did not have shelter every night of your lives? How many of you went to grad school? How many of you didn't graduate from high school? How many of you grew up speaking more than one language in your home? I used to work for a conservation organization. One of the interesting questions was, how many of you ever went hiking before you joined this organization? And this is a nature conservation organization. So, just things like that were just super illuminating to realize how different everybody's experiences coming into the workplace were. And I think that's one opening way to try to really create an embracing of diversity and in the beginning, a more inclusive environment. But I'd be interested in such tools like.
If we were coming into your organization, and if I was developing, or your team, and I wanted to say, let's do a current state assessment. If I wanted to just work with you as an individual leader, I would say, what is the we'd help you to understand what is the true experience of others in your world. If you're an entrepreneur, it's within your business, those who work for you, but it's also those who you sell to. So it would be an exploration and an opportunity for you to learn more about those that work with you and those that you sell to. The world is becoming more and more diverse. So once we understand what is the true experience of others in your world, then you're going to explore. We're gonna help you to gain different perspectives and insights to deepen your understanding of others, to assess how you feel about this new information, and begin to identify where you're willing or what you're willing to do to improve the current state. This is the beginning of this idea of a transformational journey, because you're basically saying, I live in this bubble, this is what I know, but I want to learn more about others. This takes time. Bree, I remember how you said that, it takes time to transform, right? It takes time to share. What are your thoughts about this first phase? And I'm actually going to do the first phase and the second, then I'll stop. But what are your thoughts about this current state awareness?
I think as it relates to the work that I do in schools around inclusion for people who are differently abled, the first thing that I start with when I enter a building is, what are the beliefs and values here? So just trying to kind of right off the bat, identify where are the barriers? How are people feeling when they have students with disabilities in their classroom specifically? And really kind of unearthing their beliefs and values around all of that. Do they feel as though these individuals have a place in their classroom in a way that makes them feel like they belong, not just that they're there, right? Because we kind of talked a little bit earlier about the difference between inclusion and belonging, and how really the goal of inclusion is the feeling of belonging. And I think that that's really where it starts, is with those beliefs and values. And then from there, you can kind of start to unearth your unconscious and conscious bias and be able to work from that place of your less evolved part of your brain to your more evolved part of your brain, be able to, there's this quote by Viktor Frankl that kind of always pops into my head, and that's between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So really just the idea that we have the opportunity to choose our response to something, and it doesn't always have to be our first initial reaction, but being able to identify where that space is so that you can consciously choose a different reaction. It's a hard place to get to, but that's where you're using that more evolved part of your brain.
I love that. So Bree, what are your thoughts about the importance of truly understanding what others are experiencing? Why is that important? So it's almost like walking in the shoes of others, but really hearing different perspectives.
I think it's important because it provides a foundation for being able to really understand another person.
Right. And through that understanding is how we can truly evolve.
Mm-hmm.
I like
Right.
the quote. It really, I call this intentionally embracing transformational, inclusive leadership with heart and soul. We have to choose to invest. And this is based on 4 principles, 4 proven research-based principles. It's based on this idea of positive psychology. So we don't use language that others use. We're not designed to make people feel uncomfortable by design. You may, because change isn't always easy, but it's not by design, if that makes sense. So positive psychology says we focus on the positive. We want people to drive toward a positive outcome, putting out the carrot, not the stick, right? The second is this idea of adaptive leadership. Adaptive leadership is about systems change, creating a safe space for everyone to learn and grow together. If you don't feel safe, you're not going to grow, right? The third is this idea of self-directed learning. I'm sure you've heard that term in your space, this idea of people need to want to continue to move forward, no matter where they are in the journey. And the third is this concept that I made up, built upon growth mindset. I call it growth mindset in action. So it can't just be growth mindset, right? It's not just about learning new things and knowing that you can learn and grow, but making sure that what you do as you're learning and growing aligns with what you say. Oftentimes we say the right thing, but we don't actually do the right thing. So those are the 4 principles of this idea of embracing transformational leadership with heart and soul, right? So I don't need to go any further. We're already 20 minutes over and we could continue to talk. We talked a lot about the journey. We talked about the transition, the transformation that's required as a part of this process. So that was just phase 1 is the current state awareness. Phase 2 self-analysis phase. People need to understand what do they want to move toward, their desired state, design that work, develop the work, and then test and monitor the work. So each of those phases gives us an opportunity to learn and grow together. So we're going to end this particular session, this particular element. And Miss Bree, I just wanted to thank you and everyone else who joined the call. Any final words as it relates to inclusion and what we can each do to create inclusion in our lives and to make our businesses more profitable, but make the world also a better place in doing that? What are your thoughts, Bree?
I think a thought for me is to get comfortable being uncomfortable. It's where you have to start in order to create a culture of inclusivity. And also along with that is to create, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, but also create a culture where being uncomfortable is okay.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Which is just so paradoxical to what we do and, you know, how we live our lives. We want to feel like we're in a comfortable position, but yeah, get comfortable feeling uncomfortable and be okay with feeling uncomfortable.
I love it. Thank you. So I will start with Jaslyn for this phase of the conversation. And again, this session has been about inclusion and diversity, equity, belonging, specifically as it relates to businesses. What would you like to share, my dear?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. And so from like a business owner point of view, sometimes we forget that a big chunk of the business and the plan of operation oftentimes revolves around the clients, the employees, and the leaders in that business. And so there's a big investment that goes into it, a big effort, and you want to make sure that we're properly addressing the issues, basically the day-to-day stuff that goes on in the business. Creating a culture is really important because it's just a reflection of the business owner and what goes on behind the scenes, But yeah, my biggest note, I guess, is just learning from our resources. So this is a great resource, this webinar, books, research that, has already been done for us, and we can find that in articles and all of these important spaces. But also just talking about it, bringing up that conversation in the workspace, because that will promote sharing and learning, where we lack, effort and where things can be done. But our environment, the environment we create really influences the production. Like if my workers are having a horrible day, that's the type of work they're gonna give. And if there's something that we as a business owner and the leaders can do to improve their day, it doesn't just help them, but it helps the production, So just establishing a way to create a happy community culture just influences, the kind of work everybody produces, and I mean, how you feel too about your own business, because everything you create is like a reflection usually of who you are as a person and what you bring to the table.
I love that. I love it. Yes. Well, did you say the name of your business?
No, my business is Dr. P. Greens. It's a lawn care business in Everett, and it's ran by me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, tell people how to find you.
Yeah. Well, it's called Dr. P Greens. You can find me with this like little logo. It's a Sasquatch feet and a lawnmower on the socials.
That is awesome. Dr. P Greens, I love it. Thank you for sharing, Jaslyn.
Thank you.
Perfect. Diana, any final words that you want to share as we close this session out? Any recap that you want to share regarding the benefits and the value for business owners for creating an inclusive culture in their organizations?
Well, I think that part of it is that people are fascinating and that you learn so much from each individual, and that kind of exploration of who we are, who other people are. And I think it's just a part of the joy of being alive, to tell you the truth. And even though it's challenging at times or whatever, there's just a richness that you don't have otherwise.
So are you a business owner?
I have been a business owner. I'm not currently.
Not currently. I
Yeah.
love your energy. Thank you for bringing your perspective, your curiosity, and your openness. This has been lovely. We look forward to having you as a part of the process.
Thank you. I'd love to continue.
Thank you so much. Mr. Michael, bringing you on next. Would you share, sir, any final words, like from this conversation, what would you summarize for any entrepreneur or any business person around like why it's important, or what benefits would they receive from creating an inclusive culture in their business? A learning culture of inclusion, let me put it that way, because it's a journey. A learning culture of inclusion is different than saying, go create an inclusive culture, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the journey.
It is not a destination. You know, I've been in business for 30 years now, and it's always been a process of changing and adapting in the last 3 decades. Currently, you know, in the last year, we've seen a significant social change in environment, politically, locally, neighborly, and most recently in my business, I'm also getting an experience not just of that social change, but also a change in generational inclusion for a lot of what was discussed on the meeting today, of sharing their values, learning their values, sharing their values, promoting their development, expanding the horizon, creating an environment that everybody feels comfortable about sharing. But what I'm experiencing this week is that what worked previously is not working today. So some of my exposure towards what I need to learn to change my reaction and environment to promote the next step for a very happy workforce, and to servicing customers and making sure that I'm meeting as many needs as I can. You know, it's inevitable that I'm not gonna, the business still needs to do business, and the customers still need to be worked with, but what's optimal and what's ideal, and that's what I'm looking for today. You know, I've got some kids that are millennials, and my need for identifying my preconceived, I keep forgetting that term, you know, white male predetermined experiences. What is that term again?
I'm not
Unconscious bias.
Unconscious bias. Thank you. I know I've got some unconscious bias.
Let me clarify. That's not just for white men. We all have unconscious bias.
Oh, I'm
So,
just talking about my own.
okay, yeah.
Correct.
So we all do have unconscious
We
bias.
do.
Yeah.
We very much do. My white male unconscious bias is definitely, unless anybody's been living under a rock, very at target in the last year for some of the current social situations. I would like to work on becoming more conscious and make my changes necessary to be more inclusive to the degree that, you know, I can, and for business and for employees. And like somebody else said, you know, the experience of life, you know, being isolated in the last 18 months has just been horrendous. You know, the work that I'm in, we work with people, and boy, you know, that there was a reward to be able to work with them when we did, but there's damage being done for people that are not getting out and being that. And then the current other stuff. Anyways, I'm starting to ramble. So I'm going to say
No,
thank you for opening this door. I was really, when I saw that come through, the scores opportunity, like, wow, this is a something that I definitely want to participate in. This is my first scores meeting. And I did pass it on to a number of colleagues, and I don't see any of them on here, but I know they're all pretty busy.
Well,
But
just
thank
so
you, Tracy.
thank you. This is every month, last Tuesday of the month.
I've already booked it out.
It's a Let's Talk Inclusion Roundtable. And it's more about less about my voice and more about yours, right? We want to also, and part of what I'm doing is creating not just with this session, but in general, is I consult with leaders one-on-one, with their teams, with their organizations. It really is about creating a learning culture of inclusion, but a safe space to learn and grow. I do believe in what Bree mentioned and what most people talk about being, you know, comfortable being uncomfortable, but being uncomfortable is not a requirement. It's not like let's go make someone feel uncomfortable. No, it's about let's learn and transform together. Butterflies have a little uncomfortable nature to get out of their cocoons, of course, right? So transformation is transformation, but everyone's going to do it on their own time in their own space. And it's definitely not about blame or shame or any of the things that I think happen today, which it's not necessary in order for us to have a conversation about inclusion. You don't have to feel excluded. Like, what was the guy he said? What was his name? Oh, Duncan. You know, oftentimes it seems like people don't want to hear certain voices. That's not necessary. That's not inclusion. It's about inclusion for all. So why are you nodding your head? Please do. Tell me more. Well, it matters. Yeah, the cancel culture, that was a big exposure. And I don't know that that's necessarily on this inclusion, but it was definitely an exclusion that I even through political and other things felt quite a bit, even with my own daughter who's 25, you know, and of that generation where what I grew up in my unconscious bias, well, all my experiences are 100% different than hers. That it's something that needs to change, evolve. You know, I don't necessarily think that anything that I currently believe is necessarily bad, but there's probably ways that if I can see it differently, it will change how I act upon my beliefs. So there's always change for improvement. I love it. So if you had to talk to another business, an entrepreneur, business leader, you said you shared it with a few people. Yeah. Why? What would you say to them now? What I would say to them today is that, you know, this is something that we will be experiencing. We are experiencing, and unless you've got a huge HR policy department that's got this and people that are studied in sociology, psychology, and all the other ologies that go into creating an HR policy, that, you know, this is stuff that's on your horizon. It's probably in your face right now, and you're either
conscious to the events or unconscious that you're simply just overwhelmed for a small business running and trying to do all the different hats, as we say, that this is something that if you're not thinking about it, then it's something that you should be thinking about, because your workers today need your guidance in your environment to promote an optimal work environment. And as has been said on this this webinar, is that it can lead to greater staff content, which goes into retention, which reduces your hiring, which then also is carried over into environment, which is then carried over into customer service, which is then over into productivity, which is then over into your line, revenue.
I love it. You're adorable. That could not have been more perfect. I mean, what I love about you is you're here, you're being intentional. Again, my line for the work that I do, my famous line is, being in is the win. It doesn't matter where you are on the journey, you're committed to being on the journey. That's the win. And
Yeah.
Together we can drive change. So thank you so much. Again, this is about results. Assume that your voice, exactly what you just said, is either going to be how we begin or end one of these webinars for BizFair, like bringing these voices forward. That's perfect. And so thank you. I even saw your evolution during this session alone. So we look forward to having you back. And if you need to reach me, I'm Traci.
Where's my extra hand for the evolution?
You got it. You got it. And I know business, I mean, real talk, business owners are busy. You don't have extra money for HR or D&I. Are you kidding me?
No.
You don't have, they talked earlier about how it takes more time to listen to different people. It takes more time for X, Y, and Z, for all the things that we're talking about. So the fact that you're here, that is the win.
And if you want to think, you talked about talking positivity and everything else, but the people that, tend to also need to see the negative side. If you're not doing this, then you're also potentially putting yourself at risk for some significant negative employment law, HR pitfalls that, they're not very fun as far as I hear.
I hear you. And again,
avoidance of negativity.
Right. I mean, I do focus on the positive, but of course, there are negative consequences too. We're going to focus on inviting people to be a part of this journey. They need to want to be a part of the journey and see the value along the way.
Yes.
And to bring people with them. Like, you'll hopefully bring people back with you next month. And reach out to me if you need anything. I'm Traci, Traci at itsallbiggerthanme.com. Traci at itsallbiggerthanme.com. Guys, does anyone have any final words you want to share? Raise your hand real quick. I'm looking at the gallery view. Jaslyn, let me bring you on. Yes, ma'am.
I love your enthusiasm.
Thanks.
And I just kind of want to remind you guys that just the action on getting on this webinar influences, a wider scope of people. And the material that you bring into, your workplace is also influences the next business, your competitors, into becoming more inclusive as well, because it shows in the results,
Yes.
making that happen.
I love it. Yes, yeah, it shows in the result. Let me just say thank you, thank you, thank you. This is what this is about. I appreciate each of you bringing your voices forward. Again, I always say it's bigger than me, but together it's not bigger than us. We can do this. Thank you.